All right, it is 10 o'clock, so let's get started. Good morning, everyone. I am Aaron Blumberg. I am Swiftland's Continuing Education Coordinator, and it is my pleasure to welcome you this morning to the BIBFRAME Update webinar. We have a wonderful learning opportunity ready for you this morning with Dr. Karen Snow. Dr. Karen Snow is an assistant professor in the Graduate School of Library and Information Science at Dominican University in River Forest, Illinois. She received her PhD in Information Science in 2011 from the University of North Texas, where she taught cataloging courses primarily online from 2006 until 2011 for the Department of Library and Information Sciences. She previously worked as a cataloger in the Rare Book Room, University Archives, and the Technical Services Departments at the University of North Texas. She currently teaches beginning and advanced cataloging courses at Dominican University, both face-to-face and online. Please welcome Dr. Snow and enjoy her webinar this morning. Dr. Snow?
All right. Thank you, Aaron. Can everyone hear me okay? I just want to make sure. I probably should have checked this before, but yes, all right. Okay, well, thank you guys for coming. A little low. Okay, let me see here. I don't know if I can. Let me just try to. Is that helping? Make sure, because you could also turn up your speakers too. Yeah, yeah. So yes, that's and turn it. Okay, I will jack it all on your speakers if this is too much. How about that? Is that better, Greg, Eva, Luli? All right. Okay. And yeah, and also I've already told Lula this. I've been sick for like the past week. In fact, last week I didn't have a voice. So it's actually a good thing that this is happening now because I didn't have a voice last week. So if I have a fit of coughing, I just pardon me. Pardon me. I'm going to try really hard to keep my voice and not cough through this thing. So, but very glad to see you all and some familiar names. And today. Oh, well, great. Okay, now I lost someone. Dharme, okay, you cannot hear me now at all. I'm talking now, Dharme. You can't hear me at all anymore. That's not good. Um, all right, I guess, okay. Yeah. Okay, Dharme, I'm talking now. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Make sure everyone can. If anyone lost me, then yeah, like Lily said, it may be better just to go out and come back in just to make sure. Um, pardon me. Okay. Um, anyway, so let's go ahead and get started. I know that I guess it was earlier this year. It just seems like forever ago that we had the first BibFrame webinar, and I know that several of you guys did attend that. So I want to apologize ahead of time that some of this stuff is going to be, a repeat of what I talked about earlier, but I thought it'd be a good idea just to go ahead and refresh your memory of some of the stuff that we talked about earlier this year, as well as provide an update on primarily it's the BibFrame vocabulary that there's been the most work done, and that's where we're going to kind of focus our efforts in terms of the new stuff here today on what's going on with the BibFrame vocabulary, what's just going on with it in general. So. And once again, I'm just going to assume also, the knowledge of linked data. We've already talked about linked data in a previous webinar and so forth. So I'm just going to assume that knowledge, even though we're not really going to get into that here. But the that's one of the underlying things associated with BibFrame is an understanding of linked data. That's where they're going with this. So. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get started. And as always, as you guys know, if you've been in a webinar with me, I'm very happy to take any questions or comments while I'm talking. Just feel free. I'm monitoring the little chat box, so if you have anything that you want to say, just feel free to say it, and then I can address that as we're moving along. So you don't have to wait until the end of the presentation to ask any questions. Okay, so just FYI. Pardon me. So in this session, I'm just going to first kind of set the stage with MARC, a little tiny bit of history and the problems associated with MARC. Even though we love MARC, so there are some issues associated with that, in the new digital age, and set up kind of the extensible markup language on which BibFrame is going to be using XML, that XML language for the syntax. So just a little bit about that, and then going to get right into BibFrame, the Bibliographic Framework Initiative itself, okay? So first things first, let's talk about our current encoding standard, machine-readable cataloging, right? So we've had all these changes recently with RDA. That's really kind of been the focus of the chaos lately, just trying to adjust from our transition from AACR2 to RDA, right? So so this is a little bit different, right? So RDA being our content standard, MARC, which is stayed the same, right? This has been around since the 1960s, is our encoding standard that we use to encode that data. And for those of you who are using RDA on a regular basis now, you're probably finding that in certain areas it's actually been difficult to figure out what to do with RDA in MARC. Sometimes it's like trying to fit, what a round peg in a square hole, right? Trying to figure out what to do with like main and added access points. It's a big one. That's kind of built into MARC, is having the main and added entries, which is something that's not even in RDA. So trying to kind of fit this new content standard into our, 50-year-old encoding standard has been interesting at times. So because of this, and because of this, the new digital environment, the Library of Congress has decided to move us beyond MARC, try to come up with a new encoding standard, which makes sense. They're the ones that developed MARC in the first place in the 1960s, Henriette Avram, in like early to mid 1960s. And originally they did not design it obviously for the web, right? It wasn't around then. It was really designed as a way for them to disseminate and print cards more easily and quickly. And therefore, that's why MARC records, as we know them now, still largely look like electronic cards because of that. And they function that way as well. And that's been one of the major problems with MARC in this current environment, is having an encoding standard that we're encoding our data in a way that's more difficult for machines to process. It's harder for them to process strings of data as opposed to discrete data elements. So that's problematic. So it's nice for us, right? It's easy for those of us who know MARC, it's easy for us to deal with and look at, but harder for machines to deal with. So that is a major problem with MARC, and a reason why it's really just us that use it nowadays. It's only used in the library world. Also, ISBD punctuation is sometimes used to determine the meaning of a subfield, right? So all the colons and semicolons, they're not just there to make our data look pretty, right? They're there to separate data elements, or seed data elements, and sometimes determine meaning of them, which is problematic. We don't really want that. It's once again bad for machine readability ultimately, even though this is machine readable cataloging. Also, we have different pieces of information in one field or subfield, like what I was talking about earlier with the stringiness of our data. It's in strings rather than in discrete data elements, which once again is not impossible for machines to read. Obviously, they do it, but it's just harder. It's more machine processing power to deal with that. And sometimes indicators are needed to determine the meaning of a field, which is also can be problematic. So here, like for example, is a situation where ISBD punctuation determines the meaning of content. So, and I'm pretty sure I gave this example at the previous webinar on BibFrame, how this colon and semicolon change the meaning of this field. So this is, the title, statement, responsibility field. And $A, we have the title proper, Into the Darkness. But the first instance is where we have a title-subtitle relationship, right? That colon precedes other title information, usually a subtitle, so Bob's Journey Through the Enchanted Forest. Whereas in the second instance, the semicolon does not indicate a title-proper subtitle relationship, but essentially two main titles, so two titles within a larger collection of works. So otherwise it's exactly the same except for those punctuation marks. Once again, that's not great for machine readability to have that happen. So same thing here. And this is actually worse under AACR2. RDA makes it a little bit better. But like, for example, the publication field, just like many other fields, it's stringy, right? It has, the A, B, C within one main field, right? The 260 field for publication information. But also notice that, we used to have both the publication and the copyright date in one subfield, which is also not good. We want to have that separated out if possible for better machine readability. And MARC does that, and I should have provided that example here at 264.4. for the copyright date. But yeah, now at least with RDA, we can kind of separate the publication from the distribution, from the manufacturer, from the copyright information. But it's still, the 264 field is still a string of data, right? And where actually the indicator determines the meaning of this rather than the field itself, which is also problematic. So yes, it's a little bit better, but once again, it's still not great. So enter XML, which has been around since the 1990s. It's been around for a while. A sensible markup language should help us a little bit with this situation, with making things more machine readable, because it is widely adopted in publishing, e-commerce, cultural heritage, metadata communities. It's very popular on the web for content and structure, dealing with content and structure of documents rather than visual presentation. So it's open source and non-proprietary as well. So it uses these. It looks actually very similar to HTML. Those of who are familiar with HTML, this should look very similar, but it has different purposes than HTML. It has a different purpose. It uses tags to demarcate elements that begin and end with angle brackets. So we have opening and closing tags, for example. Opening tag title with the angle brackets, and then closing tag, with the // there as well. So we can just say, look, this is the title or title proper or whatever. I just kind of made up an element name here, but XML allows you to kind of use whatever scheme you want, whatever metadata scheme, using these are called DTDs, document type definitions, and various schemas that specify what you're using, because there's many different metadata schemas out there. Remember, so MARC is not it, right? I mean, MARC is what we use in the library community, but there's also like mods and Dublin Core and VRA Core and all sorts of other metadata schemes out there, all of which that do use XML. So it's just the same syntax in essence, but just using different element names, for example, to specify what the value is. Like in this case, the brown bear is the title. But XML, like I said, doesn't specify what elements should be used, only how the elements should be tagged. Okay, And the difference, like I said, between HTML and XML is, once again, they kind of look the same, but they have a different purpose. So this HTML, which is, its predominant language on the web, is the vocabulary that describes presentation, how the data should look, not necessarily what it means, if that makes sense. As opposed to XML, which doesn't really deal with the presentation, but with the content and structure of documents. So here, for example, is an HTML example, and this information, just like on this, physiotherapy center, a description of it, the hours that it's open, the different staff members, all that, H1, like in the angle brackets, H1, H2, the BR, and so forth. That's all information that tells you, okay, like what are the line breaks, how big should the font be, and so forth. It's about how this should look to us, not what this means. So it's not like H1 means this is the name of the institute, the place of the company. That's just how big the font should be. And once again, that's great for us. I mean, it kind of therefore it allows us to kind of see it in a certain way. We can usually pick that out, right? We can usually tell, oh, okay, it's saying that the staff members are these people. Okay, that makes sense. But as we talked about, like with the linked data webinar, that's, computers are dumb, right? We have to tell them what something means. They don't automatically understand what something means unless we tell them that. So it's fine, yeah, that we can kind of tell, like, look, have this HTML syntax to kind of say, look, this is how it should look, with an understanding that, okay, we know what that means. We know that these are the staff members and this is the name of the company, and so forth, but it doesn't really help the system so much with the meaning of that. So XML does, okay? So it actually specifies, look, this is the company name, I guess Egalitas Physiotherapy Center. The treatment offered is physiotherapy. Here are the specific therapist names and naming them. Okay, this is a therapist, this is a therapist, this is the secretary, and so forth. That actually specifies the meaning. Okay, so it doesn't actually say anything really about how this should be displayed. It can be displayed however we want to display it, using HTML or other, like, style sheets and so forth. But XML is really, that's what we want to try to focus on. And what we do is we really want to kind of code our data for the meaning and so forth. And anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. So that's really what we want to focus on is the XML, and how it should be displayed is kind of another matter, right? So once again, it allows for the creation of discrete machine actionable data elements and values, okay, not strings of data, but actual discrete data values that makes it better for machine readability. And also it does allow us to create our metadata without maybe the addition of characters to denote differences between types of data and so forth if we want. I mean, we can still use, like, for example, the square brackets and the question mark to denote, like, an approximate date that we've supplied and so forth. But, with XML, it's not as necessary to do that. We can actually specify, this 1966 here is the publication date. This copyright date, this 1966 is the copyright date. This 1966 is the approximate date, and so on and so forth, without having to rely heavily on additional characters to say that. Okay, because that's really what we've been doing for the most part over the years, is doing stuff like that. We'll probably continue to do that, but with XML, it doesn't make that type of inclusion 100% necessary. So, and here I just kind of took my example from earlier, the 260 field, and broke it down using just an XML syntax. I didn't really use any particular standard here, like the elements. I just kind of made them up, but just to define that. But here, just using that same syntax, so you can see here that it's the same information, but just kind of broken down in a more easily manageable fashion for our systems, okay? And it's still readable by us. And remember, the important thing here is to realize that just because we're using XML here and breaking it down in this way doesn't mean that's how it'll necessarily be displayed to our user. We need to try to separate content, the actual metadata that we're creating, from how it should be displayed. Because really, if we have better systems, we can, or even with our current systems, quite frankly, we can kind of display however we want, really, within reason. So we need to kind of get away from necessarily how this will ultimately be displayed to our users and think about how best we can encode this and make this clear for the machines, right, for our systems. And then we can kind of worry about how this is ultimately displayed by our systems. So XML can be well-formed without being valid. Okay, so well-formed meaning just it conforms to the generic rules for XML as a meta language. Okay, so I can have, like I just showed you, a well-formed, like this one. This is a well-formed. For the most part, it doesn't have all the additional, like, root tags and stuff like that. But this is well formed. Okay, so I use the the tags properly, the angle brackets, and having the opening and closing tags properly. So that's well formed, but it's not valid. Okay, so in order to be valid and well formed, you have to validate what you've done against the document type definitions, like I mentioned before, a DTD or schema that specifies. Okay, we're using MARC, we're using mods, we're using BIBFRAME as our standard here for our elements. Okay, so it needs to kind of have both for it to be both well-formed and valid, right? So that's where BIBFRAME comes in. Is we want to use XML here, but we need to have something there. We need to have our elements and kind of some rules, right, that govern the creation of our machine-readable metadata, right? So the Bibliographic framework, which was launched in 2011 by Library of Congress, so it's actually been around. I can't believe it's been like almost 4 years now, but because it just seemed like yesterday. But this is actually a new model for bibliographic data that will be the basis for a new encoding standard. So there's a lot of development here of the classes and the vocabulary that we need to have a properly machine-readable language here. So this aims to re-envision, rather, and in the long run implement a new bibliographic environment for libraries that makes the network central and makes interconnectedness commonplace. So it really is trying to better position us, or at least attempt to better position us for a linked data environment to actually be more of the web rather than in our individual silos, if you will. Even though I hate using that term. Right now, we're not really on the web so much. We have our own kind of siloed catalogs that we have that are kind of separate from the web. And I'm not even just talking about in terms of our interface, but just our data If you do like a Google search, for example, I mean, sometimes, yeah, the OCLC, like the WorldCat information will come up, but for the most part, we're pretty separate from what's going on in the web. And, you could make an argument that, okay, well, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? I mean, we can feel pretty confident in our metadata that it's, authoritative and accurate and so forth, but, there's the wild web out there, which can be kind of scary, but the reality is that yeah, we ultimately we probably won't be just ingesting or sharing too much information just like with the World Wide Web out there. Just anyone will have our our authoritative sources that we'll use, like Library of Congress and OCLC. But the important thing is that our metadata that we can actually share, truly share, like bring in other metadata out there on the web, and also share our metadata out there so it can be more findable and so forth. So that's really what the makers of BibFrame, the developers of BibFrame, are thinking, is that we want to just be more out there and have our metadata more available in the web, on the web, and so forth. So once again, just another kind of to highlight the fact that they're really interested in this linked data environment and RDF and so forth. So you don't have to read this whole thing. This is just from the BibFrame facts page. That it relies heavily on the relationships between resources, controlled identifiers for things, much larger web of data, links between things are paramount, and so on and so forth. So if you remember last time we talked about, RDF, these statements, creating statements that specify the meanings of things. Like I use the example of Moby Dick, that, Moby Dick has an author, Herman Melville. Okay, so that's one statement about that work, Moby Dick. And each part of that statement, or what we call a triple, can be replaced by identifiers, preferably URLs, right? So identifiers that are recognized on the web, so, a URL, an HTTP website. Pardon me. So if possible, so that it's easier to, once again, find things on the web, not just in our silos. So that's what they're aiming for, is to have our data more easily, adjusted in that way. So have it so that we're essentially, as catalogers, it's not like we're going away or anything like that. But I think that our job now is going to be less focused on just creating like these records, like really focused on the record level, and really focus more on creating these statements, these accurate, authoritative statements using URLs. Okay, so that's kind of where they're going with this. Even though ultimately we're creating things that kind of essentially look like records, really the focus will be kind of shifted from thinking about each record kind of in isolation, and think about the actual specific data within that record and how it connects to other data, if that makes sense. So in terms of BibFrame, there's the model, okay, so the conceptual or practical model that contains 4 high-level classes or entities, and then the actual vocabulary. So think of it in terms of like how, RDA, the foundation of RDA is Ferber, right? The conceptual model of Ferber. So they wanted to design also, a model underlying this, just kind of like that, as opposed to just kind of throwing elements out there, a vocabulary out there to use. So I'll look at first, we'll look at the BibFrame model, and then dive into the vocabulary itself. So as I discussed last time, like I said, there are 4 high-level classes. I mean, there's other classes, okay? There's actually multiple classes out there, but there are 4 main ones. And like I said last time, I originally started calling this Bizarro Ferber, because it's just really is similar to Ferber, but not quite, right? It's not quite there. So they both have work, right? I mean, here they call it creative work, but for the most part, they call it a work. Which is, it's pretty much the same as the Ferber work, but it encompasses more. And that's why I kind of, in a sense, I like the BibFrame one better. And I think there actually are quite a few people that like the BibFrame model a little bit better in this regard, because it kind of collapses some of the the entities within Ferber, which sometimes are kind of hard to wrap your head around, like expression level and manifestation level. So work here actually encompasses both the work and expression level group 1 entities in Ferber. So this is, a resource reflecting the conceptual essence of the cataloging resource. Okay, so think of that in terms of just Moby Dick, the idea of Moby Dick, and the various ways it's been expressed. An instance is a resource reflecting an individual material embodiment of the work. So that actually encompasses both, I think, the manifestation and item level information from the Ferber Group 1 entities. So when it's become physical. So if you have a particular publication of Moby Dick, for example. An authority, a resource reflecting key authority concepts that have defined relationships reflected in the work in an instance. So for example, people, places, topics, organizations. So Herman Melville, for example, is an authority related to Moby Dick. It's someone, the person who wrote it, right? So all of the same information we're used to including in our records, but just very, specified in a certain way, kind of saying, look, this is an authority, this is an instance, this is a work, and so forth. And then annotation is a resource that enhances our knowledge. Before, like in the primer, it actually says decorates. I really like the word decorates, but I guess they changed it here on the website to enhance. Enhances our knowledge about another resource when knowing minimally who is doing the annotating is important. Okay, so like library holdings information, cover art, reviews, and so forth. Okay, so just anything that kind of enhances our knowledge of something. But the key ones being, creative work, so work, instance, and authorities. Which once again, it kind of encompasses really all of the Ferber Group 1 and 2 and 3 entities into kind of 3 classes, which in a sense kind of makes it nicer. So here's just kind of a mapping of just the Group 1 entities in Ferber to the BIBFRAME model. So here, you have the BIBFRAME on the right, which just work and instance, and then the WEMI, so the work, expression, manifestation, and an item, the Group 1 entities from Ferber, once again, have kind of collapsed into just 2 classes. So makes it much easier in a sense. So, but there you go. So I mean, they're not exactly the same, but it's just, remember, they're kind of 2 different conceptual models, and that's fine. We can use different conceptual models for things. So here's just kind of a visual representation of this. For example, if you just want to change out work here for Moby Dick has a creator, Herman Melville has a subject, whales, perseverance, whatever. So that's a particular authority. Like subjects can be authorities and so forth. A person could be an authority. This work has a particular instance, so a particular publication, the HarperCollins publication from 1995. And then, so publisher being HarperCollins, that's one authority. Published in New York, that's another authority, in a particular format, like a paperback or hardback or audiobook or whatever. Okay, so there you go. So very kind of similar there to what we talked about with Ferber, but just a little bit different. But kind of once again, kind of creating statements about this. That that this particular work has an instance. Okay, that's one statement. Has a creator. That's another statement, and so on and so forth. Making all these different connections between specific data points. And here's just kind of expansion of that using annotations, showing that a particular institution holds a particular instance, that a particular person created a review of Moby Dick, someone who reviewed it, and that would be an annotation as well. And we can kind of make those we can make all sorts of different connections. We can keep going and going and going, right? So. And once again, getting back to the idea that we want to take this information, making these statements, right, these specific statements about each individual work and the different instances and so forth, and then replacing each part of that statement with URLs. Okay, and they can see this already with a MARC record. We can already do this. I mean, it's not divided up into statements like we just saw, but we can take quite a bit of what we create in our MARC records and convert that to URLs. Here this is using the Library of Congress linked data service. This id.loc.gov is essentially putting these different authorities, like names, so personal names, corporate names, subjects like Library of Congress subject headings. Each of those have URLs associated with each subject on the web, so easily searchable on the web, not just the individual siloed authority records, and places, like New York. Publisher names, subjects, and so forth. So all sorts of this. I mean, not everything. Not everything can be necessarily converted, or do we want to convert to a URL necessarily, but quite a bit of it can. Okay, so once again, that helps make things more connected and findable and linkable on the web, because that's really the idea behind linked data, is having things linked using URLs. And I showed you this last time. This is from the BibFrame Primer, which if you haven't read the BibFrame Primer, the URL here at the bottom, I would highly recommend doing that. But this is from 2012, and things actually, have evolved since then. But this is just kind of their mock-up of what a BibFrame record might look like, using kind of a combination of what we call literals and non-literals. So literals being kind of the raw text here. So for example, they decided to, like, the title itself is not a URL. That would be a non-literal. So functional requirements for bibliographic records, just kind of a raw text kind of running out. This is what it is. And this is kind of just the work portion of this. You can see this at the very top. It says work. Okay, so we're talking about this work, the Ferber report, ironically enough. But notice here underneath the title information, it has, the creator, IFLA, and they have a URL representing IFLA, and they just kind of made up these URLs, by the way. I don't think they're not real, but they're just going to give an example. Subject, so it's about, cataloging, bibliography, Ferber, and they have URLs associated with each of those topics. And so forth. So we're not writing out, cataloging bibliography. We use the URL to represent that concept. Which, if it does change, if like the term changes or anything else, then it automatically is updated right from that page. We don't have to go through each individual record and change it, which would be nice. The abstract here, once again, is a literal. It's just kind of a text, which is fine. And then, language, and then also it has an instance. So this work has 3 specific instances associated with it. And here I'm just going to show you the instances. There are, like I said, 3, a hardback book, looks like one's a PDF and one's an HTML document, each separated out into different instances and the specific information associated with those instances. So, and once again, kind of a combination of both, raw, text as well as URLs. And, like I said, this is kind of a mock-up, and this is not how it's going to ultimately look exactly. This is what I came up with, I guess a few months ago. I forget exactly when they came out with this, but this is one of the many tools that the BibFrame developers have come out with. Let's see, this one's called the, this is the comparison service. Pardon me. This is something you can actually do now. Okay, so Greg, you have a question about instance being item record. Let me just go back for just 2 seconds. Essentially, yes. Well, not exactly. So the instance does contain item level information, like information about the specific item, but according to the model, the holdings information, like who is actually holding the work, is an annotation. Okay, so it's kind of a combination, like what you're talking about, like item level information can actually be part of both instance as well as annotation level information. But yeah, you can describe specific item level, or I don't know if you're talking about maybe like manifestation level information as well, is all kind of combined into the instance level. So if that makes sense. I know it's kind of hard to wrap your head around, but yeah. That's there. You kind of have to get used to that. But anyway, so this is how it looks if you want to do this conversion tool, this comparison service. And what I did here, and I'll go into this a little bit more in just a second, is that I took an identifier for a Library of Congress record. So this is the book is called Metadata for Digital Collections by Stephen Miller. And there's a MARC record in the Library of Congress catalog for this, and you can actually take, if there's a record in Library of Congress catalog, you can actually take that MARC record and convert it to kind of a basic BibFrame record. So that's what I did here. Now, instead of having, this, it says like, hardcover book or date, place is the element name, what they're doing now with the BibFrame vocabulary is that they have this BF : ahead of each class and property. So here it has like BF classification, and then specifically, BF classification edition, BF classification number, scheme, and so forth. And this is not perfect. As you can see, it's not actually an XML. For some reason, that this comparison service, they did not convert it to like XML, but the other ones you can't. I believe that there's another one called the transformation service that you can use to like submit MARC XML, and then it'll convert it to like BIBFRAME XML. So we'll talk about that in just a second. But just so you know, this is kind of more in terms of the actual elements that they're going to use, what it's going to look like. Okay, just FYI, you can see once again it's kind of a combination of both URLs and literals from text. So let's talk about the BibFrame vocabulary. This is what is actually, by the way, it's still in development. Okay, so please don't think. A disclaimer here. Don't think that what you're going to see now is it. Okay, that this is all that's going to be, and it cannot be changed. But this is actually still in development. Okay, the actual classes and properties that are going to be used in BibFrame in the new encoding standard. Okay, so the vocabulary is comprised of RDF properties, classes, and the relationships between and among them. Okay, so we've already talked about for the high-level classes. There's actually more classes than that. So here, I'd recommend also looking at this page. It's called BibFrame Vocabulary, Terminology, and Conventions, that actually goes through and kind of defines their terms. So like RDF class being a type of thing. For example, an RDF property is a relationship between entities, and so forth. So, and also kind of they talk about the BibFrame resource, which is this has always been a little confusing to me. So what they consider to be a quote-unquote resource is like a BibFrame work, instance, authority, or annotation, or any subclass of these classes. Okay, so that's actually the classes, but the cataloging resource is what's actually being described. Okay, so that's different. So a resource and a cataloging resource are different. Okay, so just keep that in mind when they keep using the word resource, that they're not actually talking about maybe what you're actually holding in your hand to catalog. That is something a little different. Okay, so half the battle with this, quite frankly, is just getting used to the different terminology that they're using. Okay, just kind of get your mind into a different framework of thinking about these terms and so forth. So just make sure you look at that. So this is the complete list of classes, and by the way, this is just the list, the BibFrame vocabulary list of classes and properties, but you can actually look at it in what's called like a category view as well. They actually have multiple views. There's a model view, a category view, and a list view. And I'm just going to show you screenshots from the list view, but there's different ways we can go about looking at this, just by the way. So here are the classes, including the main classes, right, of work, instance, annotation, and instance, or whatever the four main classes are, and then the other classes as well. So like agent, annotation, archival, and so forth. Okay, so these are all the many different classes we can have describing various things, right? So we can actually click on these. These are hyperlinks. Okay, so we can actually click on like agent, for example, and it'll take you to the entry for agent. So agent here is BF:agent, okay, in BibFrame. The definition, so an entity having a role in a resource, so a person, organization, etc. Label being agent, and it's a subclass of authority. Okay, so to tell you, how it's defined, as well as if it's a subclass of something else. Okay, so these are the classes. Okay, these are the classes. Here, like an annotation, a resource that asserts additional information about a other BibFrame resource, and so forth. And sometimes the descriptions are a little clunky. Like I said, this is still in development, so if there's something that just really chaps your hide, they're just like, oh, this doesn't make any sense, say something. Go through this and actually say something. And you can go on like the BibFrame discussion list and say, look, this annotation business doesn't make any sense. You need to like rewrite this, blah, 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 whatever you want to do. Because remember, this is still in development. Here are the list of properties. Okay, so like I said, there's kind of the classes, and now these are the properties. This is kind of would just show the relationships in essence. So essentially, kind of think of this in terms of like, saying, has abbreviated title, has agent and so forth. Think of this in terms of this is what we're talking about, the relationship between the class and whatever you're describing. Okay, so once again, each of these are hyperlinked, so you can kind of click on any one of these, like audience, for example, and it'll say, information that identifies the specific audience or intellectual level for which the content of the resource is considered appropriate. And this also has various information associated with it in terms of, like, this is how it should be maybe labeled in the catalog as audience. The type, okay, so it's a property as opposed to a class, for example. It's a property. And then oftentimes, not always, some of these don't actually have both domain and range. But this one, it has both domain and range. Let me explain further what that means. So once again, this top screenshot is from that the BibFrame like terminology, like the vocabulary terminology page. I have the URL right here, kind of explaining what they mean by these things. So when they say domains, they're saying that these are the subjects of a statement, so on RDF triple, and indicate that a property applies to a particular class. So audience is part of the domain intended audience. That is a class. Intended audience is a class. And audience is part of that domain. Okay, so the audience is used to describe the audience, right? Or the intended audience. Okay, so that particular class. Now, a range are the objects of the statement or the expected value. Okay, so the range of properties may be a URI structured entity or literal typed data. Okay, so for this one, for example, audience, the range is a literal. They're saying, look, for this one, you can just have a literal raw data. So for example, you could just type out ages 8 to 12. Okay, or rated R, or whatever you want, whatever would go as a value in this field. Okay, that would be a literal. Now for some, though, they actually specified that it's better to use a URI or a structured entity, like a control vocabulary, for example, or a preferred form of name. So here for subject, so a subject term is describing a resource, and once again, it's a property. It's in the domain of work, that class work. But the range is authority and work. So what it's essentially saying here is that you need to use a structured value of some sort, either like a preferred form of a name, but preferably like a URI, like a URL associated with like someone's name, for example. So I think I just pulled out Herman Melville's URL associated with his name, but because he could be a subject, right? But it could be a URL representing any subject, right? That's essentially what that's saying in terms of range. What it's recommending that you should put as a value for that particular element, if that makes sense. Okay. And once again, this is from that document, the terminology document. Once again, kind of explaining the naming conventions of classes and properties. So you may be wondering, okay, why are they have the elements the way they are? They actually are using what's called camel case. I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but it's called camel case. That's used for class and property names. So for example, like they have part number. So it starts off a lowercase, so PART is all lowercase, and then if there's a second word, you start, like the first letter of that word is uppercase, so part number, and so forth. If it's just one word, then obviously it's all lowercase, and so there's like a hump, if you will. That's why it's called camel. There's a hump in the middle. And same with like ISSN L, so L being capitalized, but ISSN not. And they even do this and you can exclude hyphens, by the way. So like the stock number as well. Like if it's stocked hyphen number, you have stock and then number all kind of smushed together. And I like how it's really weird looking, but the classification DDC, that even if it's like an acronym or an initialism, it's all uppercase normally. You do it like this. So classification's all lowercase, and then the D of DDC, of Dewey Decimal Classification, is capitalized, but the remaining DC is lowercase. Okay, so that's what's called camel case. Now, you may be wondering, though, like, okay, why is intended audience not like that? But that kind of speaks to this last little bullet point here, is that if a property has the same name as a class, then the class is uppercase, the property is lowercase. That makes sense. So intended audience is actually a class as well as a property. So that's why they have intended audience here is I is uppercase as well as the A. And then if we're talking about the property, the I of intended would be lowercase and audience, A would be uppercase. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so And then the class and property names are always singular and not plural. So person versus persons, and note versus notes, and so on and so forth. Okay, so if you're wondering, okay, why did they structure it in this way? That's why. Okay, there, explain that why. Okay, so let's look at some of the tools. This is it can be kind of frustrating to deal with these because once again they can be pretty rudimentary, but at least they give you a sense of what we're talking about here. So if you go to the bibframe.org tools/tools, there's two different tools you can try out for free. So here, I'm going to talk first about, what am I going to talk about first? I forget what I'm going to talk about first. Okay, the comparison service. So I should have done the editor first. But looking at this bottom with the MARC to BibFrame transformation tools, there's this comparison service as well as the transformation service. I'm gonna go through the comparison service because actually I personally haven't tried out. Oh, thank you, Lily. I'm trying. I haven't tried out the transformation service, so I hope that you guys do that. But it's something where you can actually submit your MARC XML records, and then you can view them as BibFrame resources. And then you can actually download that. But the comparison service is not something you can actually download. You can actually go and take an identifier. So they recommend taking that identifier from the 001 field of a MARC bib record in the Library of Congress catalog, and then take that, copy and paste that into this tool. You can just click on comparison service. It'll show you something like this. Well, it'll show you this, and you enter that MARC 001 identifier into where it says enter bib ID. You just click on run comparison. So here I'm just, like I said, what I did earlier was I went to this metadata for digital collections book, the MARC record for that in the Library of Congress catalog. If you look at just the MARC tags, just kind of click on that tab for MARC tags, find the number there at the 001, and copy and paste that into the comparison service. So here you can just copy and paste it here and click search. The first thing it'll bring up is the MARC record. Okay, so you can see it in MARC, but you can see here right next to where it says MARC, it says BibFrame. If you just click on BibFrame, it'll do this. It'll generate a BibFrame record based on the MARC record. Okay, and it's not going to be perfect, like I said, just to kind of give you a sense of what this may look like. I'm converting kind of the MARC elements, if you will, take the MARC tags and converting that to the BibFrame vocabulary. Okay, just to kind of give you a sense of that. So there's that. So that's something that you can kind of play around with. There's also the BibFrame editor. And I'm just going to kind of go through their editor for a simple monograph, but they have one here. It's called the kitchen sink profiles. And I believe what that means is that they have, like under this, where it says new held item, new instance, new work, or new. So this is essentially where they throw in everything, all the BibFrame vocabulary except for the kitchen sink. I think that's where it comes from. It's everything but the kitchen sink. So everything there. Which you can play around with, but if you want to just kind of look at it, and, like you just want to pretend to catalog, a book that's in front of you, you can click on here this new monograph. That's what I've been playing around with, is using this editor to create, metadata for a BibFrame record. So you can just look at it from just the holdings information, just the instance, just the new work, or you can kind of look at all at once. Like here. If you click on this gives you just kind of a blank template for entering in information for a particular monograph. Okay, so like title information, author and so forth. And once again, this is kind of a demo, so it's a little clunky, but just to give you a sense of it. So here I'm just gonna type in like Moby Dick, and I want to add Herman Melville. Okay, so I go here to author. He's a person, so I click on person. And it'll bring up this little box that allows you to kind of look up the preferred form of his name. So for some reason, I don't have a screen capture software that's advanced enough to kind of allow me to take a screenshot of this. So I had to actually take a photo of it. So sorry, this looks kind of, but I just took a photo of this. So when I started typing Herman Melville into this box, it automatically popped up. With the names within the LCNAF, okay, within the Library of Congress name authority file, all the Melvilles, okay, And Donna, I need to, I feel kind of behind, but I have Snagit. I actually have Snagit, and I've tried so many ways to do this, and I can't figure it out. But I will. I'm a little slow in this regard. Yeah, I actually have Snagit, and I can't quite figure out how to, like, when it does something like this, I can't get it to, like, capture it with, like, these little tiny pop-ups and so forth. So, but you guys get the drift, okay? I mean, you can play around with it yourself, and I'll work on my Snagit issues as well, and hopefully next time we can figure that out. But anyway, you get the point. So you kind of start typing in whatever name you want to look up, and it automatically kind of generates the preferred form. So, it's nice. So we took that. Sorry, let me go back. So I did that. I saved changes. Okay, that's my Herman Melville there. And then when I hit save changes, and bam, it automatically generates a URL, the URL associated with Herman Melville. There, you can't really see it very well. It's kind of right under that little lookup box, as well as the authorized access point, how we would see it in the actual catalog. Pops up as Herman Melville, right? But it has, it generates that URL, very importantly, that URL associated with him. And therefore we have him here, which the URL kind of behind the scenes there, associated with Moby Dick. And I'm not gonna just kind of work through the entire one here. You can obviously do that yourself. But I put together what I did is for this at the very bottom you can click on save, and then it automatically once again kind of generates what this would look like using the BIBFRAME vocabularies, not using XML. This is just kind of a simple HTML view, but at least it kind of converts the information that you put in there, the different element names, into the specific BIBFRAME vocabulary, if that makes sense. So here, I can't really tell here. I'm not even seeing my Herman Melville, but here, the relators, the origin, place, subject, language, and so forth. And I think here I didn't actually specify a particular vocabulary, so it's just using an example. But here, once again, you can just kind of play around with it to see kind of what you generate. So anyway, so there's, like I said, there's these various tools that they have now that you can use to create BibFrame records and just kind of get used to the vocabulary and so forth, the differences there. But I would just recommend, going in and just kind of reading through some of the vocabulary to kind of get a better understanding of what we're talking about here, and some of the possible implications. And I kind of mentioned many of these last times, but just to kind of, reiterate what I was trying to say and put a fine point on this, is that replacing MARC with XML and RDF-based standard will make our systems more efficient and user-friendly in theory. Okay, so remember, we're the only ones that use MARC. No one else outside of our community does, and so it would be better ultimately for our users if we kind of play with everyone else, use something that other people, communities on the web use. And I believe that if we do, this will ultimately provide more competition and innovation in our systems development. Right now, I think that we've really, been very stagnant in terms of innovation within our integrated library systems, and I truly believe that once we truly move to BibFrame and move away from MARC, then we'll have systems that, yes, it'll be a little bit different for us to deal with, right? It'll look a little bit different for us, but ultimately on the end game, the end point, what the users will ultimately see and the experience that they'll have will be much better. Instead of simply having what I kind of feel is more just inventory lists of what we have in our catalogs, we'll have discovery tools, true discovery tools that'll be more like the web that our users are used to, and they'll appreciate our systems a bit more. Ultimately, that's my hope, is that there will be more innovation if kind of more people can get into the game in developing our systems and really understand what we're dealing with, right, with the system. So you may be wondering, okay, well, where does RDA fit into all this? I've just learned RDA, or I'm starting to learn RDA, and now there's BibFrame coming up here, and you're just throwing all this new vocabulary at us. Where does RDA fit into this? Why can't we just use RDA elements instead of having to learn this whole new vocabulary, is maybe what you're wondering. Well, remember, just like RDA is encoding standard neutral, BibFrame is descriptive, content standard neutral. Okay, you should be able to use RDA in really any encoding standard you want, and vice versa. So BibFrame, you can use really whatever content standard you want for creating the values. However, the developer of BibFrame they acknowledge that yes, this primarily will be using RDA, so they will take that into account. So RDA is an important source of the elements for the vocabulary in BibFrame, but it's not. They're not just going to use RDA element names for the vocabulary, and that's it. Okay, because it really wants to be independent of any particular set of cataloging rules ultimately. And what really doesn't fit well within BibFrame. If you need greater granularity, if you want different elements, that will be up to what they call community profiles, kind of extensions of the vocabulary that help with specific types of materials and communities, if that makes sense. To accommodate additional elements. So remember, the BibFrame vocabulary is not, that's not like the end. That's not like all that you can work with. Ultimately, there may be some extensions there that other communities may want to develop. Like for example, the National Library of Medicine. They just recently announced that this vocabulary that's being developed is not really working as well for us as that we'd like. So we're actually going to go off on our own a little bit to develop something further. And that's fine. I mean, the developers of BibFrame are just kind of like, okay, that's fine, right? Yeah, because it is going to be kind of a wild world out there. I think we're so used to having, our MARC and our AACR2 and our specific standards that we're using, sticking to that. But in this new environment, I think that we're going to have to be a bit more open to the fact that we're going to be using many, many different standards or extensions of those standards, and it's going to be kind of a mishmash of things to deal with. And in a sense, we've been dealing with this for a long time. So, like for example, we like just looking at the table of contents, for example, we have, we've been using the ACR2, this rule 1.7b18 for our, to determine how we should transcribe our contents notes, and we use MARC field 505, right, for formatted contents notes. It looks, has a different name. So MARC 505 is actually formatted contents notes. It's actually the element name technically, whereas in ACR2 it's just contents. And this was kind of a weird connection, this mapping to RDA, because for those of you who are more familiar with RDA, you know that there's actually not a specific rule for transcribing contents notes, which always drove me absolutely bonkers. I don't know about anyone else, but it just absolutely drives me bonkers. But they don't actually have a specific rule for this. They actually have, it's related work is what they use, what they tell you to use to transcribe for information regarding transcribing a contents note. So it's this 25.1. But we said, hey, we still want to transcribe the contents note, even though RDA may not have a specific, rule here that says this is what you need to do. But we deal with that. We say, okay, well, we still want to transcribe this information in our MARC 505, and we deal with that. BibFrame, they call it, specifically table of contents, BF table of contents. But once again, we'll just kind of take that and kind of map that to RDA. We'll map that to MARC or AACR2, whatever, or other standards that are out there. And that's just kind of the reality of today's digital environment, is that there's many different standards out there that different communities use, that we just kind of map, we just map them, crosswalk them, and we deal, right? We deal with that. So we've always done that, and we'll continue to do that in a much, bigger way when we get moved to BibFrame. So once again, here's some various BibFrame resources you can use. The main website at bibframe.org, but there's also LC's website. Read the facts. Join the discussion list if you can stand it. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Sometimes the discussion is way over my head. But I think it's still important for us to be involved in this development and express our concerns and our opinions. And here's just some further reading or watching if you want. There's the BibFrame primer here. They have various webcasts and presentations on the LOC website, and these other things as well. So yeah, it's like 2 minutes left. I can see. So any questions or comments that you guys have? And like I said, I'm not going to proclaim that I am like the uber expert on this, but I can try to answer any questions or concerns that you have based upon my limited knowledge. And by the way, as Luli says, there will be the PDF version of this that you guys will get. So you can always just email me. You can just look through this again and email me if you want to if you don't feel comfortable asking something right now. Nothing? Everyone? Everyone doing okay? Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, and Laura, and that's an excellent question. I think that I know this is kind of mind I say mind-boggling. Sorry, from that movie. Anyway, mind-boggling stuff. But it's going to take a bit of getting used to. Okay, this is very different, as you guys can see, from what we're used to doing, creating MARC records. And as Laura points out, that this kind of goes back to what we're talking about with linked data. So you might want to go back to the linked data webinar that we had, whenever that was, is that the idea, like right now, okay, with our authority information, is that, you know, we use authority records. We use preferred forms of names that are transcribed, like in, you know, the 100 field of the authority record, right? And we have those names. We kind of like, you know, copy and paste the preferred form of name into our bibliographic records. When we're creating a record for Moby Dick, let's, you know, say for example, we have, you know, the preferred form or the authorized form of Herman Melville's name in that record, right? And it's, like I said, it's text, okay? So there can be like a typo in there, it can be problematic. And you know, if things change over time, if his preferred name changes over time, if someone dies and we add a death date, typically we have to either go into each bib record and change that, or kind of do a global update using our ILS. Now, so it's a little bit more work. Dealing with you know, as you guys know, dealing with authority work can be very time consuming. Now, if we have someone's identity associated with the URI, then all we need to do is just kind of update the information on that website. And in theory, if we're just using the URL within the bib record, then all of our bib records will automatically be updated based upon what is on that web page, as opposed to going through each and every bib record to double check that, oh, this is spelled correctly and we have the appropriate date, and so on and so forth. It's just, you know, it's automatically updated. So really the idea behind this is it's supposed to make it easier for us dealing with authority work, you know, either through subjects, names, and so forth. So if that, I don't know if that helps, Laura, but okay, good. Good. And Alvana, the going to be impact on MARC cataloged after BibFrame is established, and that's what's going to be interesting, is because this, like I said, this is still in development, so it's not like we're going to be working with BibFrame records like next year. There's so much MARC authority data out there that it's just going to take a lot of time to convert it and to get used to creating BibFrame records. So I don't see MARC going away anytime soon, and I don't see MARC going away anytime soon. So don't feel like this is something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to take some time to convert this, but ultimately, yeah, we're gonna not have any MARC records. Ultimately, that's really the goal, is to move away from MARC completely. So, like I said, we're more of the web and using an XML-based standard that others on the web are using, so that we're kind of, you know, share more easily and not have MARC. So anyway. But yeah, I hope that helps. I know it's really hard to wrap your brain around, but like I said, as long as you kind of keep yourself, you know, up to date on this as much as possible, read up on this, and so forth. I don't think anyone's expecting all of us to become like computer programmers or anything like that. But just to kind of get a sense of what, you know, like I said, if you kind of can wrap your head around more like, you know, linked data concepts and so forth, then it would help immensely. So. And Juana, that's a good question. I don't think, I mean, there may be, I mean, things are always changing, right? I mean, XML may not always be around, so that's always going to be a problem. I mean, standards are going to change. Right now, they're sticking with XML, and it'll likely, you know, that'll stay that way. I mean, things do change, but it's hard to predict the future, right? So, yeah. And Laura, in regards to whether or not, no. I mean, it shouldn't really matter, quite frankly. It shouldn't matter. It may be more helpful to have RDA data in there, but ultimately, like I said before, the developers of BibFrame are not expecting us to use any particular standard. I mean, we'll likely primarily be using RDA, but you can have ACR2, data in here. It doesn't really matter. I mean, ideally, you want to kind of convert, like I said, the various literals, the various text information as much as possible into URLs, but you can do that with ACR2. I mean, you can. It's maybe not pretty always, but you can. But anyway, so I hope it was an okay introduction for those of you who are kind of new to this. This is an okay introduction to this, and there's still a lot more to come. So hopefully, maybe in a year, I can do this again, and there'll be more that's more certain, I guess you could say. So. All right, guys. Thank you so much for being such wonderful attendees, as always. I love you guys.
And
so
Dr.
smart.
Snow, we love you very, very much. Thank you for a wonderful webinar. Thank you for the updated information on the BibFrame. I know many of you were wondering if I was really listening and if I was really in the room, and I was. We're very lucky to have you, Dr. Snow. Thank you so, so much. And we couldn't have ended Swiftland's calendar year on a better note than with you updating the BibFrame information for our members. For those of you that have asked repeatedly, I see that in the chat box, that are looking for the first webinar's information. You can go to Swiftland's website, to the recorded webinars section of our website, and you can click on the recording and you can listen to the webinar. If you would like that PDF of the presentation so that you can follow along the bouncing ball as she talks, please email us. You have all of our information from the multiple reminders you received from us to click and enter the room today. You have all of our emails. All you need to do is send us an email requesting that PDF, and we will be more than happy to send it to you. Attendees, remember, we're always putting up new webinars and new face-to-faces, hopefully with Dr. Snow in the very, very near future. We'll be finalizing some return appearances and what do you call those, encore presentations with Dr. Snow. So be sure to be checking our Swiftland calendar. I know, here goes the rolling of the eyes. If you haven't liked Southwest Florida Library Network on Facebook, please go ahead and do so if you're on Facebook, because that's another way that we try to reach you, and you're able, as soon as we finalize something, it goes up on the Facebook page and it'll hit your feed the nanosecond you put it up. Unless you have us blocked, and we hope you don't. This is the last of our webinars for 2014. Thank you, Dr. Snow, for rounding up our calendar year for us. And I will stay on.
My pleasure.
I know Dr. Snow has to run off to do another. She's such a Florida webinar star. She needs to rest her voice for a few minutes, but if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box and give her voice a break. And we'll stay on for just a couple of seconds. And if you need to scooch out Dr. Snow, we certainly understand. Other than that, Swiftland wishes each and every one of you a wonderful, happy, healthy holiday season. Whatever it is that you celebrate, we hope it's a happy one for you. And we look forward to serving you with many more of these wonderful opportunities in 2015.
All right. Well, if anyone else has any further questions or anything like that, like I said, feel free to email me. I mean, I think I have my email on the first slide, but just so you have it again, it's ksnow@dom.edu. Feel free to email me, and I'll be more than happy to talk to you about anything, just what I know. Like I said, based upon what I know, but there's still a lot to learn about this stuff. So. We'll see. So thank you guys so much again, but I'm going to go ahead and take off. You guys have a wonderful weekend and a wonderful holiday, and I will hopefully see you guys later.
Thank you, Dr. Snow. The same to you. All the best.